Socrates. Why did Athens execute its most famous questioner? Socrates lived more than 24 centuries ago. He was born around 469 BCE and died in 399 BCE. His home was Athens in what is now Greece. Athens was not merely a city. It was a city-state, an independent country made up of a city and the surrounding land. During Socrates' lifetime, Athens became wealthy and powerful. It was famous for architecture, theater, naval strength, democracy, philosophy, and fierce public debate. Socrates grew up while the city was rising, lived through its greatest war, and died while it was struggling to recover. Athenian democracy was very different from a modern democracy. Adult male citizens could speak and vote in the assembly, serve on large juries, and help make public decisions. Women, enslaved people, and foreigners living in Athens did not have the same political rights. That matters because public speaking was a major source of power. Citizens argued in the assembly and defended themselves in court. Athens admired debate, but debate could also threaten reputations. Socrates would spend his life testing what citizens claimed to know, and discovering how uncomfortable a democracy could become when its own assumptions were questioned. Socrates was born around 469 BCE in Alopes, a district of Athens. His father, Socrates, was a stoneworker. His mother, Phaenere, worked as a midwife. Like other Athenian boys from citizen families, Socrates probably studied reading, writing, poetry, music, and physical exercise. At about 18, he entered adult civic life and underwent military training. Nothing about this beginning announced that he would become a legendary philosopher. He was the son of working parents, educated in the normal Athenian way, and expected to serve his city as a citizen and soldier. Socrates later compared his work to his mother's work as a midwife. A midwife helps another person give birth to a baby. Socrates said that questioning could help a person give birth to an idea. He did not simply want to pour answers into someone's head. He wanted the person to state an idea, test it, discover contradictions, and decide whether it could survive. The comparison explains his style. Socrates acts less like a lecturer, delivering a finished speech, and more like a guide, helping another mind discover what it truly thinks. Socrates wrote no philosophical books. That is one of the most important facts about him. Everything we know comes through other people, and those people did not all present the same Socrates. Historians call this the Socratic problem. How can we separate the historical man from the characters created by later writers? When someone says, Socrates believed this, the more careful statement may be, Plato presents Socrates as believing this. The difference matters especially when we discuss Socrates' trial, his refusal to escape, and his final conversations about death. The early sources shape the story. Plato was a younger follower who made Socrates the central character in many dialogues. Xenophon also knew Socrates and wrote about his character and teachings. Aristophanes was a comic playwright who mocked Socrates while the philosopher was still alive. Plato often presents a brilliant moral questioner. Xenophon presents a practical and disciplined teacher. Aristophanes turns him into a ridiculous intellectual. None is a neutral camera recording events. Together, however, they reveal how fascinating and controversial Socrates had become. Ancient writers describe Socrates as bald or balding, bearded, broad-nosed, and not especially handsome by Greek standards. He lived simply and cared little for fine clothes, wealth, or appearances. He became a familiar figure in public places, especially where Athenians gathered to talk. He had no official classroom. He spoke with politicians, craftsmen, wealthy young men, soldiers, and ordinary citizens. Imagine a teacher entering a marketplace and asking, "You say you are honest. What exactly is honesty?" That was much closer to Socrates' daily life than a professor speaking from a podium. Athens also had professional teachers called sophists. They often trained wealthy young men in public speaking and argument, valuable skills in assemblies and law courts, and they normally charged fees. Socrates was often grouped with them, but he rejected the label. He did not usually charge people to listen to him, and at least in Plato's version, he was not teaching clever tricks merely to win arguments. He wanted to discover what was true and good. His critics, however, did not always accept that difference. To them, he could look like one more dangerous expert teaching young men how to outtalk their elders. Socrates' best-known technique is now called the Socratic method. Instead of immediately giving an answer, ask questions that test the answer someone already believes. Suppose a student says, "Bravery means never being afraid." Socrates asks, "If a person feels no fear while doing something foolish, is that person brave?" The student says no. Socrates replies, "Then bravery cannot simply mean having no fear. So what does bravery mean?" The first definition collapses, but the search continues. The goal is not a quick slogan. It is a definition that can survive careful examination. Socrates often began with a confident claim. Then he asked the speaker to agree to several smaller points. Eventually, those answers could contradict the original claim. The speaker discovered that two of his beliefs could not both be true. This process is sometimes called an elenchus, or refutation. It could be embarrassing, especially when spectators were watching, but its deeper purpose was moral and intellectual. Do not protect an idea merely because it belongs to you. If your belief fails, that failure is useful. You have removed a false confidence and created room for a better answer. Plato connects Socrates' mission to the Oracle of Delphi, a religious sanctuary of Apollo. Socrates' friend Chaerephon reportedly asked whether anyone was wiser than Socrates. The oracle's answer was essentially no. Socrates found this puzzling because he did not think he possessed great wisdom. He began questioning people who were considered wise: politicians, poets, craftsmen, and others. He was not simply trying to prove the oracle wrong. He was trying to understand what the divine message could mean. Socrates found that many respected people possessed real skills, but also claimed knowledge they did not have. A successful politician might speak confidently about justice without being able to explain it. A poet might create beautiful work without being able to explain every meaning others found in it. Socrates concluded that his limited wisdom may have consisted in recognizing his ignorance. The exact sentence, "I know that I know nothing," is not how Plato records it, but it captures the point. Knowing that you do not know is wiser than knowing nothing while pretending to know everything. Socrates cared most about how human beings should live. He asked about justice, courage, self-control, friendship, knowledge, goodness, and virtue. Wealth and political power were not the highest goals. What mattered was the condition of one's soul, meaning moral character, the kind of person one is becoming. People carefully manage money and train their bodies. Socrates asks whether they show the same care for honesty, fairness, and wisdom. A successful life, in his view, is not measured only by what a person owns. It is measured by who that person becomes. Plato's Apology presents Socrates saying that an unexamined life is not worth living. The statement does not mean that everyone must spend every minute doubting everything. It means that a human life should not run only on habit, popularity, fear, or inherited assumptions. What do you value? Why do you value it? Are your actions consistent with your beliefs? Could evidence change your mind? For Socrates, philosophy was not an intellectual decoration. Examination was how a person cared for character and avoided living confidently by ideas that had never been tested. Socrates was not only a questioner in the marketplace. He served Athens as a hoplite, a heavily armed infantry soldier. Hoplites fought in close formation with shields and spears, and battle could be brutal. Socrates served during the long conflict between Athens and Sparta known as the Peloponnesian War, which lasted from 431 to 404 BCE. His military service matters because he later spoke about courage, duty, and death as someone who had faced physical danger. He had experienced cold, exhaustion, defeat, and the possibility of being killed. Socrates served in the campaign at Potidaea beginning around 432 BCE. Athens was trying to crush a rebellion in the northern Aegean region. Plato's characters remember Socrates enduring hardship unusually well. During battle, he reportedly helped save the wounded Alcibiades, a younger aristocrat who later became one of Athens's most talented and controversial political figures. Whether every detail is exact or polished by admiration, the tradition consistently presents Socrates as steady under danger. The philosopher who questioned the meaning of courage was also remembered for acting courageously. Socrates also fought at Delium in 424 BCE, where Athens suffered defeat. Ancient accounts describe him retreating calmly rather than panicking, which helped discourage enemy attacks. He later served in the campaign at Amphipolis in 422 BCE. These stories complicate the image of Socrates as merely an old man talking in the streets. He fulfilled dangerous military duties for Athens. When he later argued that avoiding injustice mattered more than avoiding death, his listeners knew that he had already risked his life for the city. By middle age, Socrates had become a recognizable Athenian figure. Young men especially enjoyed watching him question respected older citizens. Imagine a politician declaring, "Of course I understand justice." Socrates begins asking questions. A few minutes later, the politician cannot explain what justice means without contradicting himself. The young spectators laugh, and the politician walks away humiliated. Socrates insisted that exposing false confidence was useful, but usefulness did not erase resentment. Every public refutation could create another enemy, and Socrates eventually admitted that years of such encounters had made him unpopular. In 423 BCE, Aristophanes produced a comedy called The Clouds. Its fictional Socrates runs a bizarre school, studies strange things, questions traditional religion, and teaches young men how to make weak arguments defeat strong ones. The play was comedy, not biography, but comedy can shape reputation. Thousands of Athenians could watch a ridiculous Socrates associated with clever dishonesty and disrespect for traditional values. Decades later, Socrates complained that these old accusations were harder to fight than the formal charges, because they had been circulating for so long that many jurors may have heard them as children. Socrates married a woman named Xanthippe, and ancient evidence names 3 sons, Lamprocles, Sophroniscus, and Menexenus. Later stories often portray Xanthippe as bad-tempered, but many were written long after her lifetime and should not be accepted automatically as reliable biography. Plato includes her in the account of Socrates' final day, grieving with their young child. Remembering the family matters. Socrates' death was not only a philosophical symbol. It left a wife without her husband and children without their father. The Peloponnesian War transformed the city around Socrates. Athens endured plague, political conflict, military defeats, rebellions among its allies, and enormous loss of life. Its invasion of Sicily from 415 to 413 BCE ended in catastrophe, destroying a major army and fleet. In 404 BCE, Athens finally surrendered to Sparta. Its empire collapsed, its walls were partly demolished, and its democracy was overthrown. The confident city of Socrates' youth had become defeated, frightened, and divided. That trauma forms the essential background to his trial. After the defeat, an oligarchic regime known as the 30 took power. Oligarchy means rule by a small group. The 30 confiscated property, arrested opponents, forced people into exile, and carried out executions. Their rule lasted only from 404 to 403 BCE, but it was brutal. One of their leading figures was Critias, a man who had been associated with Socrates. Athenians trying to understand the disaster could look backward and ask whether teachers and ideas had helped produce men like him. Critias was not the only political problem connected to Socrates. Alcibiades, the brilliant aristocrat Socrates had known and reportedly saved at Potidaea, became infamous for changing sides during the war. At different moments he served Athens, Sparta, and Persia before returning to Athenian service. Association is not proof of responsibility. Socrates did not control the choices of these men, but in a traumatized city, the connection was damaging. Critics could point to notorious former companions and ask what kind of influence Socrates had exercised over ambitious young elites. Socrates was not simply a supporter of oligarchy. The 30 ordered him and several others to arrest Leon of Salamis, apparently so Leon could be executed and his property seized. Socrates refused. He went home rather than obey an order he considered unjust. That choice was dangerous. The regime could have killed him. It collapsed before punishing him. This episode reveals a consistent pattern. Socrates could resist a democratic government or an oligarchic dictatorship when he believed it demanded injustice. His highest loyalty was not to a political faction, but to doing what he judged right. Democracy was restored in 403 BCE, but Athens did not instantly become peaceful or confident. Citizens had lost relatives, fought one another, survived purges, watched their empire disappear, and seen their government overthrown. The restored democracy tried to rebuild without reopening every political grievance. In this atmosphere, a man who encouraged young people to question respected authorities could appear more dangerous than he had during prosperous years. The Socrates mocked in comedy in 423 BCE was prosecuted in a deeply wounded city in 399 BCE. In 399 BCE, when Socrates was about 70, 3 men were associated with his prosecution. Meletus, a poet, formally brought the charge. Anytus was an influential political figure. Lycon also supported the case. The accusations had 2 main parts. Socrates corrupted the young, and he failed to recognize the gods recognized by Athens while introducing new divine things. The religious accusation is often summarized as impiety. These were the official charges, but decades of damaged reputation and political suspicion stood behind them. The charge did not mean modern child abuse. The prosecutors meant that Socrates' influence supposedly made younger Athenians morally or politically worse. He encouraged young listeners to question politicians, teachers, traditions, and supposed experts. Some young men copied his argumentative style. A few associates later behaved disastrously. His enemies could say, "Look at the people around him." Socrates' response was that association is not instruction. The prosecution needed to show that he had actually taught young people to become bad, not merely that some people who knew him later committed wrongs. Religion and public life were closely connected in Athens. Civic festivals, temples, sacrifices, and government responsibilities formed one system. Socrates considered himself religious and linked his mission to Apollo and Delphi, yet he also spoke of a daemonion, a divine sign that sometimes warned him not to take a certain action. His accusers could describe this as a new divine thing. The dispute was not simply religious Athenians against an atheist Socrates. It concerned whether Socrates' unusual religious language and questioning undermined the city's accepted relationship with its gods. Was the trial secretly political? Historians still debate the exact motives. The official charges were religious and moral, but politics formed part of the background. Athenians remembered Critias, Alcibiades, the 30, the Lost War, and Socrates' public challenges to authority. They also remembered the caricature from the clouds. Personal grudges, religious unease, political trauma, and genuine irritation had accumulated for years. There was probably no single cause. Socrates entered court carrying not only two written charges, but a reputation built by decades of controversy. Athenian trials differed sharply from modern trials. There was no professional judge deciding guilt and no long series of hearings. Large juries of ordinary male citizens heard speeches and voted, often within one day. Socrates' jury is commonly reconstructed as 501 citizens. Our most famous account of his defense is Plato's Apology. Here, apology means a defense speech, not an expression of regret. Plato's work is not a word-for-word transcript, but it became the central record of how Socrates' defense was remembered. Plato's Socrates does not behave like a frightened defendant. He argues that his questioning has benefited Athens by pushing citizens to care about wisdom and character. He compares himself to a gadfly, an insect that bites and bothers a large animal. Athens is like a powerful but sluggish horse. Socrates is the irritating fly keeping it awake. The comparison summarizes his entire mission. You find me annoying because I challenge you, but that challenge is valuable. It is also a risky message to deliver to hundreds of people, deciding whether to convict you. Socrates cross-examines Meletus in classic Socratic style. Did Socrates deliberately corrupt young people? Why would he intentionally make the people around him wicked, when wicked neighbors could harm him? If any harmful influence was accidental, Socrates argues, he should have been corrected or instructed rather than prosecuted. He also presses Meletus on the religious charge, trying to show that accusing someone of believing in divine things while believing in no divinities makes little sense. Plato presents the exchange as exposing weaknesses in the accusation, though the jury was not persuaded enough to acquit. Socrates says that even if Athens offered freedom on the condition that he stop philosophizing, he would refuse. He believed his duty to examine life mattered more than his safety. He also refused to parade his crying wife and children before the jury to gain sympathy. Jurors, he argued, should decide according to justice rather than pity. Both positions sound principled, but they were dangerous courtroom choices. Socrates would not promise silence, flatter the jury, or perform desperation. He defended the same way of life that had brought him to trial. The jury found Socrates guilty. Plato does not list the exact count, but he says that changing roughly 30 votes would have reversed the result. If the jury had 501 members, a common reconstruction is about 280 guilty to 221 not guilty. The verdict was close enough to show that many Athenians accepted Socrates' defense, but a majority did not. The trial then entered a penalty phase in which the prosecution and the convicted defendant proposed competing punishments. The prosecutors proposed death. Socrates now had a chance to suggest an alternative such as exile or a serious fine. Instead, he provocatively suggested that he deserved free meals at public expense, an honor given to victorious athletes and public benefactors, because his questioning had helped Athens. Imagine being convicted and responding, "My proper punishment is an award." Eventually, his friends, including Plato and Crito, offered to guarantee a fine of 30 minae. But the jury chose death, and the majority for death was larger than the majority that had voted to convict. Why did Socrates not offer exile and save his life? Part of the answer is that he believed living well mattered more than simply living longer. Exile might also appear to admit that his entire philosophical life had been harmful. Where could he go and continue questioning people without creating the same conflicts? Most importantly, Socrates refused to treat moral principles as rules to follow only when convenient. Once condemned, he would face an even sharper version of this problem. Could he escape from a legal judgment he believed was unjust? Socrates was not executed immediately. Athens had sent a sacred ship to the island of Delos on a religious mission connected with Apollo. While the mission was underway, the city did not carry out executions. The ship had left around the time of the trial, so Socrates remained in prison until it returned. Xenophon's chronology suggests the delay may have lasted about 30 days. Socrates therefore had weeks rather than hours. His friends could visit him, and at least one friend believed there was still time to save him. Plato's Credo presents Socrates' wealthy friend arriving in prison with an escape plan. Money was available, officials could be bribed, Socrates could leave Athens and live elsewhere. Credo raises emotional and practical arguments. What about Socrates' children? Should he not remain alive to raise them? What will people think if his friends appear unwilling to spend money to rescue him? For many people, escape would be the obvious choice. Socrates refuses to decide by fear, reputation, or even family pressure. He returns to the question that has guided his life. What is the just action? Socrates asks whether it is ever right to commit injustice deliberately. His answer is no. If someone wrongs you, that does not make it right to wrong them in return. Plato then imagines the laws of Athens speaking. Socrates has lived under these laws for roughly 70 years. He enjoyed the rights of citizenship and could have left earlier if he rejected the city's system. To destroy the judgment only when it turned against him would violate the agreement he had lived by. Even if Athens treated him unjustly, Socrates believed escape would make him answer injustice with another injustice. Plato's Phaedo gives the famous account of Socrates' final day, but Plato says he was absent because he was ill. The story is told through another follower, Phaedo, and some arguments may reflect Plato's developing philosophy as much as the historical Socrates. According to the dialogue, Xanthippe visited with their young child and grieved before being taken home. Socrates then spent his remaining hours speaking with friends about death, knowledge, philosophy, and whether the soul survives the body. Even in prison, he remained a philosopher in conversation. Plato's Socrates refuses to assume that death is the worst possible fate. We do not truly know what death is, so how can we confidently call it the greatest evil? Perhaps it resembles a dreamless sleep. Perhaps the soul continues and meets those who died before. What Socrates considers clearly worse is becoming unjust or corrupt merely to preserve the body. As evening approached, he bathed so his household would not have to wash his body afterward. He said goodbye to his family. Then the prison official brought the state-provided poison, traditionally identified as hemlock. Socrates took the cup and drank. Plato describes him walking until his legs became heavy, then lying down as numbness and paralysis moved upward through his body. Real hemlock poisoning may not match every calm medical detail in Plato's literary scene, so the safest claim is that Plato presents a gradual paralysis after the poison. Socrates' friends wept while he remained composed. His final recorded words were, "Credo, we owe a cock to Asclepius." Asclepius was a god of healing. Perhaps Socrates viewed death as a kind of cure, but the exact meaning remains uncertain. He died in 399 BCE at about 70. Athens executed Socrates through a collision of philosophy, religion, political trauma, damaged reputation, personal resentment, and his own refusal to compromise. The story leaves a painful contradiction. A democracy famous for public debate condemned its most famous questioner, while that questioner accepted the law rather than escape. Socrates wrote nothing, yet Plato made him central to philosophy. Plato later taught Aristotle, creating the famous line Socrates to Plato to Aristotle. His method survives wherever people test assumptions with questions. His lasting challenge is simple: do not merely inherit beliefs. Examine them and care about the person you are becoming. Question: why is it difficult to know exactly what the historical Socrates believed? Answer: Socrates wrote nothing, so we know him through writers such as Plato, Xenophon, and Aristophanes, who present different versions of him. Question: what is the basic purpose of the Socratic method? Answer: it uses questions to test a person's beliefs, expose contradictions, and replace false confidence with clearer thinking. Question: what did Socrates learn from questioning people after the oracle at Delphi called him wise? Answer: many people claimed knowledge they did not have, while Socrates at least recognized the limits of his own knowledge. Question: what two main charges were brought against Socrates in 399 BCE? Answer: he was accused of corrupting the young and of religious impiety, failing to recognize Athens as gods while introducing new divine things. Question: why did Socrates refuse Crito's escape plan? Answer: he believed it was never right to answer injustice with another injustice, and escaping would violate the laws under which he had lived as an Athenian citizen. Question: what is Socrates' most important legacy? Answer: he made disciplined questioning, intellectual humility, and care for moral character central to philosophy, strongly influencing Plato, Aristotle, and later education.